I'm with Michael Tracey, everybody. Welcome to Walk-Ins. Welcome. Thank you for being here. You're the man under fire at the moment.
Greetings. Really? I hadn't noticed.
How are you doing? First of all, before we get started, just how are you doing?
You mean like personally?
Yeah.
Emotionally?
I mean, it's interesting because for those of you who don't know, Michael Tracey is a journalist, and you have been someone who's, in interviewing people about Epstein, it's actually much harder to find people who are pushing back against the, I would say, dominant narrative that this was a pedo island and they were sacrificing children and eating them. And so
That's a new wrinkle to the dominant narrative. That's like a week old, maybe. It's bizarre.
So I had Ted Frank on a bit ago, and my audience had lots of feelings about his kind of, he was very much talking about just what we know and what the courts know. And because I was like, what do we actually know? What are the facts about this? And then I saw you starting to go kind of all in on pushing back against a lot of what people were saying. And it's this like tactic that I absolutely hate. And I've seen this from the left and the right. And it's like, it's like, you're a baby killer, or you're in this instance, pedo, which I actually think is probably the worst thing that somebody could be called.
It's worse than even killing the baby. Sexually abusing the baby is probably seen as worse morally.
In prison, even murderers will kill the pedos.
Right.
It is, even among criminals, it is the worst thing, obviously, that you can be obviously like accused of, but also just if you are, they're gonna probably kill you in prison, which is a lot of people's argument against the death penalty. It's like that.
In American prison culture, a convicted murderer can easily integrate into the prison, society, let's say, or like in terms of how prisoners organize themselves and kind of structure their existences. But perceived pedophiles cannot. They have to either be ostracized and form their own little group. They call them chomos, child molesters for short, or they get beaten up, killed, etc. But they cannot participate in like the larger prison, population.
So we have this show, Dumpster Fire, and we've been doing stories for 7. Like we did one episode, we were like, oh my gosh, is everyone a pedo? And it was after the big Boy Scout scandal. And then you hear about these kind of rubber rooms for the teachers and all of these places where there is actual documented pedophilia in our society. And I wonder too if this Epstein thing captures that, because you've been trying to stick to facts, but I see your mentions and it is nuts. And I was just wanted to start with like, what makes you constitutionally capable of putting yourself in this situation?
Well, first of all, I've accepted that when it comes to comment sections or replies or anywhere that you're getting online feedback, like 95% plus of it is going to be virulently hostile toward me on this subject.
Yes.
And, that alone would probably be sufficient cause for a lot of people not to even bother, because there's a chronic problem of audience capture on the internet that especially plagues the online or alternative media. I don't even know if we should call it alternative media anymore, because it seems to me to be pretty dominant. Like, is Joe Rogan really an alternative to something at this point? And I'm not saying that he personally is audience captured. I'm just saying that given the incentives, the financial incentives around how media now operates on the internet, you have to cater to your subscribers and your audience. And there's a direct financial factor there, because if you say something that too many people dislike, they're going to unsubscribe. And not that this never affected the more mainstream media. Like, I don't know if people recall, but before the 2024 election, the Washington Post, I guess at the direction of Jeff Bezos, declined to issue an endorsement. They had, I think, written an endorsement, like an editorial endorsement of Kamala Harris, and then it never got published, right? And there was a mass unsubscription, campaign.
Right.
And I think they lost like 250,000 subscribers or something, which is, a lot of money. But with people who have, like the Washington Post, they have the financial resources theoretically to withstand that, although, they got a lot of them got mass fired recently. But if you're a kind of a smaller scale media proprietor of some kind, then like losing a big chunk of your audience would actually do serious harm to your bottom line, then you have to be cognizant of that. And I'm just not really susceptible to that incentive constitutionally. Like I've made a conscious choice not to be. And I would advise more people to at least be cognizant of that, because the audience capture phenomenon is too much. Like, not to name names or get into any kind of drama, which I try to avoid, but like I couldn't help but notice that this guy, Jimmy Dore, who I had been on friendly terms with in the past, not that I would necessarily agree on everything or we had the same disposition, but like I logged on, like people will send me stuff because they know what gets me going. And like, if you look at his page recently, it's just like Pizzagate real Epstein email proves. It's just like the most kind of conspiracy brain melted slop imaginable. And, people, I think, would be reasonable to observe that this is the kind of thing that the algorithm incentivizes. You're kind of you got into the algorithmic sweet spot. So much about this Epstein story really goes to like the beating heart of what riles people up on the internet and what gets stuff sent to the top of the algorithmic heap or the slop heap. So that really is a big factor here. So like when I first started, I had intermittently covered or followed certain aspects of the Epstein story for a number of years, but I never really did the deepest of all dives and got maniacally obsessed with it like I have been recently until early July of last year, when the notorious FBI DOJ memo came out, basically dispelling every tenet of the common Epstein mythology, but then introducing some new bizarre claims. And it, created a huge political controversy, as I'm sure you recall. People thought Trump was doing a cover up, et cetera. So that's when I really started doing the deepest of all dives. And around that time, I was like mass unfollowed. I mean, I lost for the first time that I could recall in terms of X. Not that I try not to pay that close of attention to like, the fluctuations of a follower count, but like it's difficult not to notice occasionally. And like, I lost thousands of followers, which, didn't stop me from continuing to do that, what I was doing. It's just to say that if a lot of people who are quote unquote content creators, maybe not so much journalists, although journalists definitely are susceptible to this, but like content creators, whatever that means, or I'm like an influencer, or I'm some failed comedian who now thinks that I'm some political oracle and I'm going to have everybody gather around on the internet to hear my latest takes on things. Like, I would think that they're probably more reactive to those sorts of fluctuations in their followership, et cetera. And like, this is the worst possible tailored issue to that kind of sensibility. So I was like literally the only one that I knew of in the media who would take an approach like this that I did to the Epstein story. We get like whispers behind the scenes from some journalists saying, "Hey, I didn't know this, and this is sort of illuminating, so thanks for doing what you're doing," et cetera. But they didn't really want to take the public beatdown that would inevitably accompany actually engaging in earnest on this subject in a public forum. Because you get inundated, as I guess you have seen day after day, 24/7, with people just calling you a pedo. And, there's really not a whole lot good you can do with that accusation, because if you try to refute it seriously, right, then you're just bringing more attention to it. And most people don't even want to be spoken in the same breath as the term pedophilia, whatever the context. But it's unavoidable on this subject. And this is the dominant political controversy of the day, right? Not just in the United States, but around the world at this point. So I find I really have no other choice.
Yeah, it's interesting that you lead with this talking about the audience capture stuff, because I started as a columnist for Playboy when I first got my first job writing after many years of wanting to write. And I was like, I don't need to, I'm an opinion writer. I'm just writing a column. And my brilliant editor who was there at the time, Joe Donatelli, who now works for local news in Ohio, he said all brilliant columnists are journalists. And I learned the ropes through him and really started understanding journalistic standards because I didn't go to college for this or whatever. I really was just learning on the job.
I didn't either.
And then I ended up doing podcasting, and that's an interesting. It's always been an interesting world to me because I wouldn't even say mainstream versus. I think it's all mainstream now. I think it's like old money versus new money. It's like just old media versus new media, and new media has no standards for journalism really at all. And
old media does. I mean,
and
that's not to say there aren't lots of flaws with like the New York Times or something, but at least they have to adhere to minimum standards of factual verification, which are just non-existent in this new media sphere. It's maddening.
And
like this guy, Dave Smith, will just like hop on the podcast and say, yo, dude, I just saw that Jeffrey Epstein won the lottery. What's up with that, dude? I mean, come on. And like, he doesn't take 2 seconds to do like a scintilla of verification of the claim and just like states this fact in front of, I don't know how big his audience is, too big. And yeah, I mean, what is that? I mean, journalists, if you're a journalist, like you end up cultivating a disposition where you just would never be able to bring yourself to do that. Like if like actual journalists lay awake at night worrying that they might have committed a factual error.
Yeah. I ran into this with another podcast, and it's a very big podcast. They and they're friends of mine. They made a mistake and like misattributed a quote to me. And I was like, I never said this. I've never said this. I never said that I think Trump is not going to leave office if he wins the election. And then they were like, oh, whoops. We'll see if our team can take that down. And I was like, as a journalist, that would keep me up at night. That kind of mistake would have ended careers. Me up at night.
That would have ended careers in the past, not yours, but whoever like fabricated a quote, or especially if there was no attempt to correct it.
Well, there was like it's a long story, but it was this crazy moment where I was like, oh, this is like it's pretend journalism. You know, it's not. Yeah. It kind of presents itself as it's journalism in that you're interviewing people, and so you could take a journalist could take those interviews and they could then go fact check things and write pieces about them, and you're doing an interview, but you're not. It's not. It doesn't have any of the standards as journalists, and so I've always lived in tension in this space, and when you talk about audience capture. I now make my living doing this, writing. It's piecemeal through many different things. And I live on razor thin, like we're just kind of making ends meet because I pay people to help and so I am very aware of those fluctuations of which you speak in which you say something and you lose a bunch of subscribers. And for somebody who's big, it barely even makes a dent. But for somebody like me, it kind of could make or break being able to pay my bills or not. And
yeah, like I try not even to check like my paid subscribers because I don't want to even subconsciously cause it to bias me in one direction or another. Like, am I going to end up subconsciously doing stuff journalistically or whatever?
I will say it's become like a bit of a true north for me, though, in the sense that, and I dealt with this in 2005 when everyone in the podcasting space was really going all in on like Gaza and anti-Israel, and this is weirdly morphed into a lot of this Epstein stuff, and that was getting all of the algorithmic juice, and I'm not that person. And this is another area where I said this to someone the other day. They were like, well, how do you kind of judge what is true or what is false? I'm like, I don't know what's true or false. I can only know that if I'm saying, wow, it would be really easy for me to lean into this Pizzagate, as like lean into all this Epstein stuff and just collect subscribers and money, that to me is a sign that something it gives me some insight into like where the masses are.
Yeah, I mean, you could take out your brain, like fry it on a frying pan, then put it back in your head, and then just do whatever you feel compelled to do based on your brain now being fried, and that would then lead you to this churn of Pizzagate slop content.
But it's everywhere. I mean, did you see the stuff that the parents are canceling the school pictures all over America?
What? No, I missed this.
Okay, so because one of the guys, Leon Black, apparently hold on, I just tweeted about it, so I'll just read. It's definitely taken on like a complete life of its own, even among normies now, because it's seeping into memes and everything, and if you go on Instagram, it's all over there with like, did you see this and did you see that?
Yeah.
So it says schools are canceling Picture Day because of a wave of concerned parents who don't
says
trust.
This?
It was like from Reddit.
It's okay.
So it's Picture Day is canceled over. Schools are canceling Picture Day because of a wave of concerned parents who don't trust the school photo company Lifetouch after they've been tied to Epstein via billionaire Leon Black. So apparently Leon Black had ownership in Lifetouch, and this was one of the early, because
Is this on our Austin, like the Austin
our
subreddit?
teachers or something?
I happen to see it on our Austin. Schools across the country are canceling Picture Day. Okay.
Oh,
I'll take a
okay,
look
yeah.
at it.
So it's definitely spreading amongst I think it becomes like this,
I mean, this is so stupid.
But like I said on X, I was like, you guys post pictures of your kids on social media. Like, who do you think is getting these pictures of your kids?
Also, Leon Black is not credibly accused of doing anything untoward with children. He's just not. I mean, people can assume he is because he did have this business relationship with Epstein, or he was one of Epstein's clients. He's a hedge fund manager. But like, okay, so like, what's the logic that now has us believe that because maybe I don't know, I've never heard of this company that takes the school photos, but like, what is the danger supposed to be now? Because it's like in some way tangentially connected to Leon Black. Therefore, they're going to vacuum up the photos of the school children and
they think that
dump
they were
them
making
into
like
some
a database.
sort of pedophilic database. Okay.
Yes.
I mean,
so
okay. If that's what you want to believe, then enjoy your moral panic.
This is what's interesting to me, and I've seen you talk on a lot of podcasts about the details, and we can get into those. But I'm more interested in, as you've been kind of fighting this fight of, because I was not really taken by the Epstein stuff, and then this recent dump, I was joking that I was like freebasing them. And my husband's a very skeptical person in general. He's like, you've got to meet a certain threshold of evidence, and there's just not evidence. And I was like, honey, did you see this thing about the lotto? We were just in bed, and it was when it was coming out. And he's like, Bridget, it takes literally 30 seconds for me to debunk that. And so he's just kind of fact checking me in real time. Not that I was, because he's like, what? And because he's a therapist, he said, what are you getting out of this? You know, he's like, what are you enjoying about this? And I was like, oh, it's kind of fun to let yourself get swept away with all of it. But what do you think from being so engaged in this? What do you think people are getting out of this?
Yeah, I mean, it actually might be more interesting to do sort of a meta conversation, because I've done a lot of podcasts where I go through like the nitty gritty of the factual and legal details, which I'm happy to do, but I really haven't done as much where we talk about it from this angle, almost from a more like discursive standpoint. Maybe that's not the right word, but like just in terms of the more sort of theoretical dimensions of it.
I'm all in for that, because like I said, I think you did a great job going through it on Coleman's podcast, and I do have some questions, you know, and this is again something like my husband said, because the Zorro Ranch thing is very strange that I still don't understand why they never like searched that place.
Yeah, I saw that. I'm not 100% certain about that. Again, like I need to see more context to like form a definitive conclusion when one of these files gets splashed across the feed, because people don't realize that like there are different phases of investigations. So a file that, for example, names somebody as a potential co-conspirator, it doesn't necessarily mean that whoever in a U.S. attorney's office or at the FBI is like discussing the prospect of this person being a co-conspirator, that therefore means they believe that they have proof beyond a reasonable doubt to convict someone of being a conspirator to a sex trafficking conspiracy or something, right? Oftentimes the designation of some target, investigatory target as a co-conspirator will not be geared toward actually charging them, but maybe compelling them to give testimony or to testify against someone, or it might just be an initial investigatory phase where it's a possible target, and more evidence comes in, and then they take a different direction. So like there's a lot of ambiguity and necessary context for people to understand what the actual significance of any given file is. But of course, nobody really has the inclination to go into any greater depth than what is just flittering across their social media sort of transoms.
I was going to say, Michael, no one has time for context.
Yeah. But in terms of the Zorro Ranch, it would be interesting, I actually would buy, I don't know for sure if this is the case, but I would buy that ranch was never searched because I never heard of it being searched. And I thought I probably would have heard of that. And it's occurred to me in the past, like, did they ever search the ranch? I hadn't heard that they did or didn't.
This is the one area where I could get my skeptical husband to admit that, because I'm like, the things like this that are weird just leave things open for people to become more conspiratorial in their thinking about it. And but as he always says, weird does not mean that there was like something illegal.
Well, you got to bear in mind when, so in terms of the July 2019 federal indictment of Jeffrey Epstein, the relevant locations where the government alleged crimes took place were Florida and New York. So that was sufficient to establish an interstate nexus that would then put the offenses within the government claim the federal ambit. To my recollection, there was no allegation in that indictment of misconduct or sexual improprieties at all in New Mexico, but it wasn't necessary for those purposes in order to bring an initial indictment or to get the grand jury to indict. I suspect that the ranch was ultimately searched because there was a New Mexico component in the charges against Ghislaine Maxwell. And I think that email, if I'm remembering, with somebody saying we haven't searched the ranch, et cetera. What year was it? Was it 2021 or maybe 2022? I forget.
I feel like they were going to, and then it got shut down, and now they're going to search it or something.
I would have to have it in front of me, and I have to know the date, et cetera.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I just know that it's weird they didn't initially.
Well, they did search definitely the island in the U.S. Virgin Islands. They searched the New York townhouse. The Palm Beach residence had already been searched years before. Did they search it again now federally? I can't quite recall. But even so, right, the material, the offense, like in 2019 when he's federally indicted, the criminal conduct that's alleged was only from the period of like 1998 or something to 2005. Or the latest criminal conduct that was alleged was 2005. So they never even found anything when they searched those other properties that would suggest with probable cause that Epstein continued to commit or allegedly committed any kind of criminal offense post 2005. And this was 14 years later. So I don't know, just something to bear in mind, but I would definitely like to know a bit more about the Zorro Ranch thing. There are so many threads to pull on all this that it's impossible sometimes even know where to begin or where to at least for me to focus my energies. And I should probably stop spending so much time refuting the random, excretions on social media of somebody just radically misinterpreting something. But I'm sorry, it is very disturbing if people are becoming convinced that there was mass scale child rape based on what they take certain implicative meanings of a snippet of an email to be. And, Joe Rogan yesterday, there was a clip that came out that of course somebody sent me just kind of rile me up, where he's just stating his fact that, he pulls up this tweet from Whitney Webb, one of the most bizarre people in the media landscape that is for some reason revered as this authoritative figure, where they're saying, look at how prescient she was. She tweeted in April of 2020 that Leslie Wexner was guilty of financing a sex trafficking conspiracy that led to the rape of thousands of American children. And like everybody takes that to have been true because they found some like random email where they claim like some weird turn of phrase was used to connote something.
Yeah, I mean, what is this based on? Like because the reason that I heard about, I was thinking when this all came up, when did I first hear about Epstein? Because, you know, a lot of these people who are being dragged through the mud, as you've talked about before, what would people have known about him in 2015, 2016? Now, I was in media, addicted to being very online, and I followed this girl, I feel Sarah Kendzior.
Yeah.
And she was really, and this is when I was still in, I was really worried that all the stuff was true and Trump was a dictator.
She was really into like Russian collusion stuff as well.
And fascism and all of this stuff. So I feel like through that time, because this was right around when Virginia, she came out and made her claim again. And I felt like it was to try and implicate Trump somewhat. So I felt like in 2015, this was certainly around, but you had to be very online. And I think that's when I first became aware, maybe it was in the years following of Whitney and a lot of her work too, that seemed actually more focused on the business connections of Peter Thiel and Palantir and Wexner and Epstein, and just the kind of massive web of technocratic control that was also a blackmailing ring and all of this other stuff.
But she also said that there was thousands of American children who have been raped and it's been covered up at the direction of Israel or something. So I've never bought this little pivot people like to make. Well, no, we're just going to focus here on the financial web. Okay, why would the financial web of these particular guys or these particular entities even be something that you'd be aware of or wanting to investigate so thoroughly, if not for the underlying premise that it has something to do with this mass rape of children atrocity? Right? It's just not separable in terms of why Jeffrey Epstein is even a live issue in the public imagination. So yes. I've never bought that pivot. She even said to me in August, when like everybody was bombarding me with demands to like engage with Whitney Webb's work, and I would be humiliated and realize how wrong I was because she has this magisterial command of everything, and like she's this incredible researcher. Her research is a joke. She doesn't really do legitimate research. I'm sure she does some what she perceives to be research, but she admitted to me that the whole impetus for her book was this. Let me start over. If you read page 1 of her supposedly, authoritative tome of a book, One Nation Under Blackmail,
yes,
she says that she was spurred to even get involved in the Epstein story to begin with because she saw this now notorious quote, allegedly from Alex Acosta, saying he was told Epstein belonged to intelligence and let it go, essentially. It's just a phony quote. Basically, it was just Steve Bannon spreading gossip, and then it gets repurposed by Vicky Ward, this tabloid journalist. And Whitney Webb says that this was her whole inspiration for even delving into the Epstein issue in the first place. And she clearly did not do the slightest bit of research to actually examine the provenance of that quote.
Right.
Nor look for any information that might be contrary to the quote, because she doesn't do actual primary source investigation on the relevant legal documents, because there was a whole lengthy 300 plus page report from 2020, a year before her book even came out, where Acosta's on the record under oath and under deposition being asked directly, did you say that Epstein belonged to intelligence and that's why you gave him some kind of quote unquote sweetheart deal, which it wasn't a sweetheart deal, but anyway. And he says no. So he would have been criminally liable had he lied in that scenario. And then, that's been verified on other occasions as well. But she didn't even, before supposedly writing this enormous volume or 2 volumes of some kind of book that's supposed to be what people can read to be, bequeathed with the Rosetta Stone to understand the Epstein story and how it like fits into all these structures of power and blah, 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 blah. Like she didn't read this document. Like she told me that actually she admitted to me that she had never even heard of its existence as of August of 2025. So I'm sorry, like if you are supposedly like the internet's leading Epstein quote unquote researcher, and not only hadn't you read that report, you hadn't even known it existed, then there is some fundamental flaw in the research. And that really speaks to a flaw that characterizes so much of the online clamor around this stuff, or who people think of as their valid sources of information. So anyway, sorry to get on a Whitney Webb tangent, but like these sweet tweets are being resurfaced of hers where like everybody's proclaiming how vindicated she was because in 2020, on the basis of nothing, she just declares that somehow we can know with factual certainty that there were thousands of American children who were raped. And I'm sorry, that's like, it's almost not funny anymore. Like you shouldn't be causing people to believe that there's this mass child rape atrocity that took place and it's being covered up, or maybe it's even still happening. Like it gets people understandably crazed and paranoid and incapable of using their rational faculties. So for Joe Rogan to get on hop on the pod in front of the largest audience on the internet and tout this prophecy from Whitney Webb as though, 6 years later, it's been dramatically vindicated. I mean, that's really bad. That's pernicious, isn't it?
It's, I've been so...
Like, where are the child rapes? Like, show us a shred of evidence for it. I mean, you're asserting it. Like, if you make an assertion, ought you not to have some evidence that substantiates the assertion? Apparently on this issue, no, you don't need anything. You could just have like these harebrained conjectures that I guess you assume must have like a kernel of truth to it somewhere in a piece of evidence you've never bothered to try to locate. And then you could just spout off on the internet. But I mean, what are we talking about? This is such a polluted information landscape. It's unbelievable.
Are you dealing with an HMO like I am? It is such a pain in the bum. If I want to get any sort of testing done to ensure I'm making my health a priority, I have to wait weeks for an appointment to see my doctor. Then I have to get a referral from her and wait weeks more for an appointment with the specialist I needed to see. Quest simplifies this process. I can purchase my own lab tests online and test for a multitude of health issues I might be concerned about. Then take those test results to my doctor, better armed with the information I need. At questhealth.com, you can get hundreds of tests across several different categories, from allergies to heart health, hormones, sexual health, women's health tests for egg quantity, perimenopause, menopause, men's health tests for testosterone, prostate, and so much more. These are lab quality tests, the same ones you'd be given at your doctor's office. So prioritize your health and visit questhealth.com today. Use the code WALKINS25 to get 25% off and find answers to the multitude of health questions you may have. That's questhealth.com and use the code WALKINS25 for 25% off. Link in the description below. My husband calls it the million penny fallacy, and we were talking about this the other day, and he said, when you release 3 million emails like this, it's low quality information and it's 3 million pieces of information. And he's like, if I put 1 million pennies in front of you, it would look like a lot of money, but it would be jack shit. And I was laughing because I'm like, it is kind of true that a lot of this stuff put together can look like a lot of something, except it's really maybe doesn't amount to anything. So it kind of leads me back to, well, I have a couple questions for you.
Well, I mean, just one point on that. I do not say, even though people might accuse me of saying something like this, while I don't, I would not say at all that there's nothing of interest in these quote unquote Epstein files.
Believe me,
there's plenty. There's plenty. And there's plenty that somebody who has a little bit of discernment can stumble upon that would actually be pretty revelatory. It's just not from quite the same angle as what people would like those revelations to, illustrate. And it's not all emails either. It's like a lot of like internal, memoranda from the FBI, from the DOJ. There's like a million different types of records. So it's not just these scattershot emails that people have tended to focus on social media. So for example, I was able to figure out, I did an article on this a couple of days ago, that this massive figure that's been touted for the past like 6 months, starting from in July with that FBI DOJ memo that launched the whole furor, that supposedly there are over 1,000 Epstein victims, and people hear that
Yeah, I
number
was
and
wondering about
they say, oh my God, there really was this massive systematic child rape ring. And if that many innocent children were sexually victimized, how could it possibly be the case that there were no other co-conspirators? That doesn't make any sense. And I understand that intuitive reaction. That really doesn't really make sense on its face, because at the same time, the FBI and DOJ were saying no client list, no blackmail, no further co-conspirators to charge, et cetera. It didn't seem to add up. So when you read carefully the language of that memo, it immediately struck me as like weasel wordage. They say over, our review that they initiated when the second Trump administration came in of like the pre-existing investigatory file. Our review found that while we're, telling you that all the myths that you believed are not true, we're also here to state that over 1,000 victims were, quote, harmed by Epstein. What does that mean? That's very vague, because if they're saying that over 1,000 children were sexually abused, why wouldn't they just say that? And yet that figure took on a life of its own, just regurgitated across the political spectrum and the media.
If you ask Grok, it will say it's thousands of victims.
Does it? Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised, because it gets just repeated everywhere totally uncritically. But instantly I was able to surmise that there was something sketchy about that figure. And, because, whoever wrote that memo, or whatever group of people were involved in drafting that memo, definitely considered their word choice carefully. So it was very deliberate. And it was deliberate obfuscation, as now has been confirmed, because thankfully, since this latest document production on January 30th, internal communications and memoranda have come out that actually explains what the basis of that, mind-boggling number is. And it's basically just a fraud. They say that it's based on a tally of purported victims. They'll just say victims. No longer does anybody ever say alleged or qualify this description of victimhood in any way, which is a civil liberties problem unto itself. But even among the alleged victims, right, it's like a tiny minority, I guess, because they say it's alleged victims and their families. Really? So it's like, did Jeffrey Epstein go around raping every victim's father? Like, what does that even mean? Are we including second cousins? It's so bizarre. But they use this to inflate the total number so that everybody got crazed around this supposedly shocking universe of victims that are out there, and demanding accountability to avenge all these child sex crime victims. And it was just a total concoction. It's unbelievable. So that's a genuine revelation that is contained in these Epstein files, if you'd like to find it. Here's another one. Well, I mean, again, like, it's going to take forever to go through like every nook and cranny of this stuff. Like, if that's ever even possible, it was like millions of files. People think that like the most productive way to approach sifting through the files is to type in foodstuffs into the search bar. So, pizza or beef jerky or something. And because like a bunch of results come up, that means, I don't know, they're speaking in coded language about pedophilia in some email. Meanwhile, I mean, don't you think with like millions of files, you can input almost any search term and you'll get some results? Like, just to illustrate this yesterday, I thought of 3 random words: kangaroo, saxophone, doormat. And I said, okay, I'm just going to search them. And, and you get a bunch of results. So if like I wanted to have like some kind of theory around like a kangaroo coded language scheme, I guess I could conjure up some theory like that, but like I'm also not like a total retard. I don't even like to use that word too much. But, supposedly under Trump, we're all told that like it's cool to use the word retard. So like the people who are doing that are like genuinely retarded, if that term would apply to anybody.
Is there anything that you can concede about it that does, and again, my husband will say just because something's weird doesn't mean that it's a crime, but sometimes the way they do speak about things is strange. So I can't understand. Again, I try and understand. 2005 kind of messed me up in terms
2025 or 2025?
2025.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. 2000. well, 2005 too, probably, but 2025 was
I don't know if we looked at all your personal text messages and emails and all
Oh,
private
they'd be
communications
weird.
you had from 15 years ago. Don't you think somebody would be able to isolate something that might seem weird out of context?
Oh, totally.
So there you go. I mean, it's not that difficult
I
to
think
comprehend.
anyone's, truly.
Exactly. There you go.
And so this goes back to
And
the
Jeffrey
question I
Epstein was
asked.
like on his phone constantly. If you watch that interview that he did with Steve Bannon, which I think I was, if not the first, one of the first to call attention just to the existence of this 14 hours of video footage that Steve Bannon produced while he was going around, self-righteously calling for the release of the quote Epstein files back in July. And like he mysteriously like clammed up about it ever since. I'm like, wait a second. If we're talking about potentially revelatory quote Epstein files that we know exist but are being kept concealed, Steve Bannon is in possession of maybe the biggest one of all, which is that he conducted the only known video interview with Epstein for that was extremely lengthy, 14 hours. To my knowledge, only 2 hours were produced in this production. I don't really understand like where the rest of it is, but anyway, if you would watch that 2 hours, they end up going on a little, not tangent, but like they make a quip about how Epstein's just always on his phone. He's chronically on his phone because it's like he's a, money manager. Like he just works off his phone all day, every day.
Yeah.
And so that's why there's just this like bizarre volume of emailing and texting from him constantly. Cause he's one of those guys, I guess, like, just like on a BlackBerry all the time, or I don't know, that's just like what his lifestyle was. So like, if he's just on his own phone constantly, that's how he does his work. And also it's like incorporated into his personal life. And you go back to like, you go from like, I don't know, 2005 to 2009. There's stuff even prior to that, like in different documents. It's just like a huge volume of material so that you can confirmation bias your way into like picking and choosing any little tidbit that might validate whatever your pre-existing worldview is, which is why my approach was when this became such a media political maelstrom starting in July. It's like, okay, I was already sort of skeptical of a lot of the premises anyway, based on what research and reporting I had done at that point, but I'm going to treat this as though I'm starting from scratch, right? I'm not going to take any premise at first value. I'm going to go to the primary source material, court documents, depositions, not just take at face value any kind of like second or third hand characterization from anybody.
Uh-huh.
And then, thankfully there's an enormous amount of primary source material if people want to go through it, but people really don't go through it. Like if this guy is like the most notorious pedophile in world history, right? Then wouldn't you think at some point, and like he's always called a convicted pedophile, wouldn't you think at some point somebody, given all the journalistic resources that have been poured into this story, not to mention the unbelievably voluminous amount of civil litigation, et cetera, don't you think that somebody at some point would have like thought to themselves, gee, shouldn't we check if what the criminal charges that he pleaded guilty to in Florida, like to determine if he was a convicted pedophile? Yeah. Meaning, shouldn't we go to the transcript that's available on the Florida court docket of the June 30th, 2008 plea hearing in which he entered his guilty plea to these two state level charges? And nobody apparently ever did that. Nobody ever apparently did that. You know why? I suspect, or maybe nobody was just even cognizant that it was something to check. But like, turns out if you do look at it, then it doesn't substantiate at all. In fact, it flatly contradicts this idea that he was a convicted pedophile. Sorry, he wasn't, because the one victim that the state identified in terms of who he was pleading guilty to, procuring as a minor for prostitution, that's the literal name of the statute, was 17 and said that she had consensual sexual relations with him on the eve of her 18th birthday. And I'm sorry, like, yes, that was statutorily illegal in Florida, which has the highest age of consent in the country, but it would have been legal in the majority of other states. Just in terms of like the legal permissibility of consensual sexual relations with someone of that age. If we're talking about like commercial sex acts or some kind of quote trafficking thing, different story, but just on its face, the legality of consensual sex, that's permissible whether people like it or not in much of the country. And if you don't like it, you're free to petition your state legislatures. But like,
Did
if you go
he-
one
was
straight,
it like
one
a-
state north to Georgia, it wouldn't have been illegal. So like, if you're going to say that that's pedophilia and that makes him a convicted pedophile, then I guess we have state sanctioned pedophilia in a majority of the United States.
Yeah, I think too, people don't want to split hairs about it, but it really is an important distinction. Unfortunately, that you've got to make it. You have to make it even as a therapist with like with a mandate to report and things like that. You constantly have to make these distinctions between, statutory rape and statutory and pedophilia, which has I think it's under a certain age as well. But so I'm just not clear. Did he like plea down from what he was accused of? Was he accused of something worse and then he accepted something lesser because how did that first trial?
So the Palm Beach police launch a local investigation against him in early 2005.
And why did they launch this investigation?
Okay, so a 14-year-old who, so most of the girls in that Palm Beach phase were a bit older than 14, even if they were technically not above the legal age of consent. Like, it's mostly from like among the not of age alleged victims, they would be older than 14 by and large. So there was this aberrational instance of a 14-year-old being recruited to go to the house by a girl who was older, who at the time was 18, Haley Robson, who we're now told is the survivor who appears at press conferences and goes on TV and, proclaims what her, the profundity of her survivorship. But, it's all on the record that she is the one who first encountered this younger girl who was then 14 and invited her to come to the house and told her to lie about her age. She shows up. Epstein does ask this younger girl her age, and she tells him that she's 18. She performs a massage. It doesn't escalate into a fully sexualized massage because not every massage encounter was like the same gradation of sexualization, but she does strip to her basically underwear and perform the massage. And there's like some, touching over the course of the massage, like no real overt sexual act. Oftentimes what would happen is like as a girl would keep coming time after time, like each subsequent visit would tend to escalate more in terms of the sexual activity. But on that first visit, the 14-year-old doesn't really engage in any overt sexual act. Obviously not a great idea for anybody a man in his 50s to be in a situation where it's even a possibility that a 14-year-old will be coming over to like even be in a sexualized scenario. So I've never contested that.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like he's obviously very interested in barely legal, if not legal. But I think it's safe to say the guy is a creep.
Yeah, I think I think his interest would have been for slim, petite girls who were the youngest possible that he would be lawfully able to engage with, let's say.
Yeah. Not great.
No, not great, but like, okay, is this the world's largest pedophilia scandal?
Right.
Should we look at things proportionally?
Like children were being eaten. There's a picture of it really has escalated. It reminds me of that meme where it's like, wow, that escalated quickly. So
anyway, you asked but did he plead down? He didn't exactly plead down. Like the 14-year-old, basically she eventually acknowledged when asked that there was no overt sexual act. So that's difficult to charge.
Is this the fight that people talk about that Julie Brown heard about or something like that?
Yeah, there was a fight at school. That's how it got found out about. She goes the one time, she comes back, gossip spreads. She gets into a fight with another girl who is sort of, I guess, making fun of her or teasing her about having gone or whatever. And a fight happens, I think, in gym class, and they get called into the guidance counselor's office. The guidance counselor finds that this girl has like $300 cash in her bag, which she would have no reason really to have. She lies and says, "Oh, I got it from my job," but I don't even know if she had a job or like she wouldn't get that much cash from her job. And then the mom gets called. And eventually the mom pries it out of her that she went to this creepy rich guy's house in Palm Beach. And then she calls the police. That's how the investigation is initiated. And so they ended up kind of like scouting out other girls who had gone to the house, none of whom had like declared in public that they were victims of anything necessarily. They only get found out and then basically told that they're victims because the police say so once they're called in for like interviews or have to, go to the department to sit down with a detective. So then he ends up like, it's a whole convoluted legal tale, but like eventually what happens is the state attorney in Florida is concerned about some of the problems with the evidence. And so he brings it to a grand jury, right? Which is sort of unusual for a prostitution case because that's what it was considered, to be brought to a grand jury. And the grand jury indicts Epstein for felony solicitation of prostitution. So, obviously it's not great for anybody nobody would want to be charged with a felony, but like it definitely wasn't one of the most severe felonies in the Florida criminal code. So the police are angry at that resolution, and they are blaming the state attorney's office for not being aggressive enough in prosecuting Epstein, and they complain to the feds. The feds intercede, meaning Alex Acosta's office, the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of Florida. They intercede. They say, okay, yeah, he should have to face a more stringent punishment than what the state charges at this point. So we're going to do our own investigation federally and figure out like what he could potentially be charged with.
Why did they feel that way?
That's what some of the prosecutors, that's just like that was the assessment of the prosecutors in that prosecutor's office as to what punishment was warranted for the conduct that they could determine took place or what they alleged took place. Meaning they thought that there ought to have been a more severe punishment than what the state attorney's office produced as like the outcome.
And this was for just the 14-year-old?
For at that point, there were like a bunch of girls that had been identified. Some who were 18 or up, but like a bunch who were not. And
there were some were underage and some weren't.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because it's like there were like cliques of girls, like
so there were
in
minors.
A friend group. Some would be 18, some would be maybe 17. It would be in a little spectrum. Yeah, there were some of them. Yeah, there were minors who definitely went to the house. Okay, and sometimes engaged in a sexualized massage. However, there were Jeffrey Epstein would be of the belief much of the time that they were 18 because there would have been directives gone out amongst the girls to either tell him and lie that they were 18 if they were not, or have a fake ID. Now, he was sort of impulsive at this time. He was taking high doses of testosterone, according to Ghislaine Maxwell. So I think, it's probably pretty plausible that like at a certain time he might have known. Actually, he pleaded guilty to one instance of this. So like he might have had awareness that the girl was not 18 in a particular circumstance, but much of the time they were lying about their ages. Sometimes they,
or
so
he just wanted them to lie and knew. I mean, he seems
possibly but he wasn't a dumb guy, so it's hard to imagine that he would have like invited this situation. I mean, he did invite it
it's
to
just
a degree.
Like plausible deniability. I mean,
he was pathologically obsessed with. He definitely was pathologically obsessed with getting constant massages day in and day out, oftentimes multiple times a day. Like sometimes they would just be a massage. Like he had like a weird ideology around like the necessity of constant massaging, but sometimes they would be more sexualized. Sometimes it would be a professional masseuse. Other times it would be these random girls who were like saying, "Hey, do you want to go get $300 by performing a massage for 45 minutes?"
Yeah, it seems like it would have to be pretty bad for it to be escalated to like the federal level.
Yeah, I mean the Palm Beach police detective complained to the feds, so yeah, they at least perceived it to be bad enough, and so he didn't plea down as much as after the federal investigation, what the office decided to do, at the direction of Acosta, but there were other prosecutors who were more involved in the day-to-day workings of the case who said, okay, given what we want to do basically is get the most severe punishment that would be available had the state attorney's office brought the most severe charge available to them. which essentially was about 2 years of incarceration, lifetime registry as a sex offender, and then they added like an additional component to this non-prosecution agreement whereby Epstein would have to waive his ability to contest civil claims brought against him and pay monetary damages to this group of alleged victims that the feds had identified as victims. Even that, there were some issues because sometimes, an alleged victim would get a letter called a victim, or they would get something called a victim notification letter informing them that they're a victim and that there's this investigation going on and that they can, be apprised that they're at this investigative step. But then they would deny that they were a victim. Or they would say, I love Jeffrey Epstein. What are you talking about?
Right.
Or if they would want anyone prosecuted, they would say, prosecute this other girl who maybe brought me or something. Like there was like a few maybe amongst the girls.
Right.
And so the evidence was not nearly as straightforward as I guess some people would like to believe. And so the optimal resolution, and actually the federal prosecutors were concerned that if it did go to trial, meaning if they just indicted him federally at that point, which they did draw up a draft indictment, not they didn't bring it, but they drew it up in part as leverage to compel him to accede to the non-prosecution agreement, which he didn't want to do. Because like he didn't want to register for life as a sex offender, et cetera. But they could like dangle that over his head saying, look, if you don't agree to the non-prosecution agreement, we are prepared to indict you. And so it's like a negotiating tactic. But at the same time, if you look at their communal internal sort of deliberations, the feds thought there was a very good chance or enough of a chance that it was a real risk that if it had gone to trial, Epstein could be acquitted. So they said, okay, so like, what's our best option here? Get him to plea to these state level charges and we'll at least have some punishment, right? And that'll be the best way to resolve it. But then it got like reframed years later as like, quote, sweetheart deal. And like, oh, maybe it was because intelligence was somehow involved, like he got a more lenient sentence. It's just like people who never did the basics of actually examining any of the sort of underlying factual tenets of how this stuff proceeded. So yeah, a whole host of misconceptions around so many aspects of this.
So do you have this goes to like two questions I have for you that are a little more meta. What would it take for you to change your mind about where are you on it now in terms of you believe it's pretty much just a moral panic?
I would say like 90 or 95% of it. Yeah. Obviously, so in terms of like, I would acknowledge, so who would be a legitimate, just straightforward victim that anybody could agree, or like I would, be able to grant would be a legitimate victim. Okay, well, some of these, I think there are some examples of girls who are told by like their friends that there's this opportunity available to go to this guy's house, and maybe they're not filled in on like what the details are, and they go and they are like weirded out by it or creeped out by it, and then they kind of want to leave and don't go back. Most of the time, it would not be the case that like on that initial visit there would be like an overt sexual encounter, but even like, it's not that difficult to imagine a girl who's like 16 or something, like not knowing she's getting into and being creeped out and maybe being upset. Okay. So sure, that's a form of victimization. I'm not sure if it necessarily should entail like what people take to be the biggest international pedophilia crisis in human history. I'm not sure if it should be like a legitimate basis for the government of the United Kingdom to be collapsing right now, or like for there to be a giant scandal in Norway, or there's so many countries are wrapped up to this. It's kind of incredible. But like if you were to put it in proportion, yeah, I mean there's something that's wrongful in a way that happened there, but it's like not anywhere near to the proportion that it's been blown up to be as the years have gone by and the mythology has radically accelerated and gone far beyond like what the initial factual basis of it was.
And why are these, why are these other countries do you see this kind of fallout? What's their, is it just perception, or is there actually a there?
Also, you say like, what would it take for me to admit I was wrong or to change my position, right? Well, I've always been at least strive to be resolutely fact-based and evidence-based. So if there were evidence that's credible, that's like verifiable, that you could corroborate, that you could cross-check, et cetera, that you could use like a legitimate empirical method to determine the veracity of, that, I don't know, actually did somehow establish that there was a vast child sex trafficking and blackmail operation, then okay, then the evidence would speak for itself, but there just isn't. And people try to construe little bits and pieces of evidence toward that conclusion that they've already presupposed the truth of.
Right.
So it's like reverse reasoning.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, that's what I would want in order to shift my views on this. And my views can shift and have shifted to some extent on certain aspects of it, but it's like tethered to the record. And so I guess that's how I would answer that. I hope it doesn't seem too, smug. In terms of what's going on in other countries, yeah, it's bizarre. Like, as you can, I think, tell at this point, anybody who had the most fleeting peripheral connection ever to Epstein is now like being raked over the coals.
Mm-hmm.
Even if they're not even like really credibly accused of doing anything per se wrong, much less having been involved in a child sex trafficking ring, but like just the mere association, guilt by association, is sufficient to create these giant political controversies. So, for example, the government of Norway basically suspended and then forced the resignation of their current, or their previously current, ambassador to Jordan and Iraq, because she happened to be acquainted with Epstein and there were emails that came out. What did she do wrong? Like, did she do anything even like unethical or much less criminal? No, not that anybody's even alleged, but now she's under police investigation in Norway. That's just one little example.
Do you think there is something in there and that's why they would resign?
No, not that I can tell. It's just, again, it's simply the association. It's just like Jeffrey Epstein has taken on this image as world historic mega villain, Hitler and Satan incarnate, but then with a dimension of perceived pedophilia that makes everybody even more blinkered and unwilling to use any sort of like modes of ordinary human reasoning to understand like what the facts and evidence consist of. Like I think it was in, I think one of the ministers in the government of Slovakia had to resign because he was at some function with him.
Yeah, there was one going around that I saw right when I was coming in to interview you about the guy. This is allegedly like the quote unquote torture email that was going around. I'm not exactly sure what email that is referring to. And people are like, what video is in here? And it was he resigned from his job or something like that. It's interesting to me that on the heels of COVID, it's many of the people who push back against kind of rightfully a lot of the mass craziness around COVID. And then on the heels of Me Too as well, where a lot of the same people that I see who are kind of really caught up in the most extreme versions of this, we're pushing back against the overreach of Me Too. But they don't seem to be able to recognize that there's an alarming amount of that same witch hunty feeling occurring. It feels to me like it's such a weird, it's weird to live in what feels like a dark ages and an information age.
Yeah.
Like I get it looking
That's
back
ironic,
at the dark ages, but I don't understand it now. And maybe it's just because there's so much information, you can actually believe whatever you want to believe. And this again goes back to my very original question. What is it about this that is so compelling to the masses?
Yeah. On the Me Too thing, I started pointing out pretty early on that it would seem strange that a lot of these like right-wing tough guy characters who you would think would be first to be highly skeptical or even like aggressively dismissive of some of the sort of premises of like a Me Too style outlook, they decided, maybe not consciously, but in practice, to create this giant carve out for the Epstein story for reasons that I've never really gotten a great explanation for, other than it got just subsumed into this mega narrative where it maybe never occurred to them that like the same standards they would apply to similar type stories of like accusations being leveled and they're not corroborated. And maybe we have to like not just like instinctively believe everything we hear and actually do some investigation. I don't know, for whatever reason, the radioactivity of the story or like the unique political, cultural salience of it just caused them to not conceptualize it in terms of what their prior skepticism would have been toward like a Me Too style issue. Because like there's so many different facets. Like you have people who are mostly into the intelligence, espionage, thriller angle that they have perceived, or because like they think that it implicates all these prominent individuals, not in like the histrionic, like conclusory way that people will characterize it. Like, oh, he was definitely an agent of Mossad, like running a honeypot operation or something. Like, no. I mean, did he have dealings with people connected to the government of Israel? Sure. Also to people connected to the government of the United States. I mean, he literally was a longtime social associate of the current president.
Yeah.
Of the current president and also a former president. So like, he knew, a guy, Peter Mandelson, a top longtime political operator in the UK who was the UK ambassador to the US in the Labour government. He had to resign because, he exchanged these like jocular emails with Epstein. That's one of the weirdest ones because he's gay. So I'm not sure like what female victims people are claiming he must have victimized. But like that's a connection to the government of Great Britain. I mean, you could potentially suggest, point to connections to the government of Saudi Arabia, of Russia, of Cuba. He somehow met Fidel Castro, to a bunch of other governments. And so there's a bit of myopia with Israel among a certain demographic, let's say. That's not to say that he didn't have certain ties to Israel, if you want to just use tie as something that has like all this explanatory power. But it's been greatly exaggerated. And also, like, if it's not, if it hadn't been the case that the sort of foundational premise here was supposed to be that there was this massive, sprawling pedophile ring enforced by blackmail that ensnared all these VIPs, then people wouldn't have had any reason to be searching so voraciously for these like scattered ties to things. Like, what significance is that tie or lack thereof to Israel or any other country supposed to have, if not for how we take it to relate to the underlying alleged or purported sexual blackmail operation, right? So there's this there's this like a house of cards. If you pull out the bottom card and it's the pedo blackmail ring, the whole thing collapses, and yet people like want there to be a house of cards where you could pull that out and like it still remains sturdy. And then they put on at the top like, okay, we found a new connection where like he emailed Ehud Barak about some business dealing that tied to some firm that's connected to some Israeli, military venture.
Yeah, that was like a recording, wasn't it? It was
There is a recording that came out. I actually haven't gotten a chance to listen to that, but like this relationship was known well before this latest document,
right?
Production. But like people just don't really use sound reasoning to think through virtually any of this.
Well, the population too was, so this is where what I was kind of saying about 2025 is that there was this mass belief that kind of America is Israel's bitch. This is and it was very connected to Epstein in this pedo blackmail ring.
Right. So this was kind of
what?
I mean, that's the Whitney Webb contention. I mean, if people were pulling up old tweets of her 2020, when I was doing my sort of examination of her work history, as people were demanding that I do, could find her like just again stating as fact, as though this is proven and like there's no two ways about it, that Israel directed a honeypot blackmail scheme that resulted in like mass scale systematic child rape and controls our entire government. Like that's how our government, like the United States is fundamentally governed by an Israeli directed sexual blackmail child rape scheme.
Because one of the weirder things that came
and so like
out
everything flows from that initial premise, right? So if that premise is not actually supportable, then why would we even know the name Jeffrey Epstein right now?
And this is one of those things
it wouldn't ever have come up.
Yeah, I do wonder too, like you said, there are so many threads to pull from the why are people, how much of this, and I do wonder.
It's very visceral and primal, okay? So anything to do with pedophilia or abuse of children, like it automatically provokes this incredibly intense emotional reaction.
Yes.
So you pair that with, okay, there could be an espionage sort of aspect to it, which people already sort of are excited to follow, like James Bond or the Bourne trilogy. Like, you know, it's like a trope of popular entertainment, espionage. Wow. And then, okay, now we're being told that this espionage and pedophilia cover up also has such profound explanatory power in terms of how our societies are fundamentally governed. Oh, and by the way, all these prominent people, we can tie in with Jeffrey Epstein because he really was an incredibly prolific networker. So we can throw in Bill Clinton, we can throw in Donald Trump, we can throw in Bill Gates, we can throw in Prince Andrew. Random people are always coming out of it at some time, one way or another. Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, Michael Jackson was in the release in December. Kevin Spacey. I mean, on and on and on. And so it's like just a recipe for this, again, mega narrative that almost has something for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, this is something I was thinking about coming into this, is how much of this is like the peasants demanding the heads of the royals, you know, and what's the threshold for the peasants to actually be right? Because there does feel like it's fascinating for me to see people who fly around in private jets talking about the elites as if they're somehow separate from this other class of elite. You know, there's this weird thing happening as the class war becomes more focused that, and I think this is very representative of that as well, because it does seem to be taking I've been kind of not joking, that like everyone's becoming politically homeless now, where they're like, oh, everybody's in on this blackmail ring. We're ruled by people who are literally, there's that guy who went viral who was like, they're eating babies in the Atlanta airport. Did you see this?
Yeah. I saw that clip go out. I couldn't bring myself to actually watch it.
So
no, it makes people crazy. I mean, this is actually making.
But how much of it is this class war that is manifesting?
Yeah, I don't buy that it's class war. Like, one of my issues from the outset with how this story functions is that it causes the promulgation of misdiagnoses of political problems. So if your conception of a class war now is like fundamentally overlain with this idea that like the real problem with the class struggle, right, or the crux of the class struggle is not like some Marxist outlook on the concentration of wealth or the maldistribution of resources, but that there is this pervasive sexual blackmail operation that's led to thousands of child rapes. I don't know how conducive that is to like an actual critique of like the upper crust. I think it's like a giant deflection.
But maybe if people feel powerless to do anything about all the things that you just articulated, like a concentration of wealth, and they feel like they can't, there's been all of this talk about how the younger generations can't get ahead. Maybe it does get overlaid onto something that they feel like they can take these people down.
But then they're expending
for.
Their political energies rather than actually directing their political energies toward what might bring about some kind of solution to those problems, they're directing it at this fever-brained, internet-addled fantasy. So it's a misdirection of their attentional and political resources.
But as you have mentioned, people are resigning, and it's like Me Too on steroids. And if people are paying a price for this, Peter Tia, these people who are viewed as people with power, Noam Chomsky for some reason, even though he's like and can't refute any of this because he's stroke-ridden in bed.
But this is not changing the fundamental class structures. It's just like you're getting a couple of scalps just because somebody 10 years ago happened to exchange some jocular emails with Jeffrey Epstein. So it's not like a real class struggle. You're not, collectivizing any wealth or anything. I mean, it's just like a total red herring.
Right. So, yeah, it's just fascinating because seeing it spread amongst like normie, the culture is so primed for this, and this is something I was saying even yesterday on Dumpster Fire as we had this whole, trans shooting in Canada and the way the media reports on these things. And now you're like, can you just say that it's male so that people don't increasingly like lose their minds? And I'm like, the right now believes that everything is a conspiracy. And so many of the conspiracies have been proven true that now everybody assumes that every conspiracy is true, basically. That if it's,
there's like a conspiracist, there's like an epistemology of conspiracism that is pretty much like the dominant ideological sensibility on the internet at this point, as embodied by somebody like a Joe Rogan. It's not like he's like, forcefully ideological or rigidly ideological. It's just kind of like the default epistemology. Like, yeah, conspiracies are pretty much true, although like maybe he'll refute some, or like some of them are crazy, but like that's just sort of his fundamental outlook.
But that's literally every the top 10 biggest podcasts.
So you're right. The culture is primed for it. I agree.
Candace Owens was one of the biggest podcasts in the world leading into this.
Tucker's kind of now almost merging with that sensibility. Jimmy Dore. So it's like a left-right convergence thing. They all kind of land on this one weird sort of syncretic conspiracism that juices the algorithm and gets a lot of followers and viewers.
My husband and I were talking about this too, and it's so prime for the algorithm because you can always just kind of move the goalposts and you can never prove that it's not true, and so it's this never-ending loophole that you can just continue to like rack up views and continue to fuel. And the internet has always been primed for this, and I actually think a lot of things. There are internet sleuths who have figured things out online, and conspiracy is real. There have been many conspiracies, and people have felt like they have been lied to by the media and by their government. And this feels like the like singularity of conspiracy.
But the antidote to government malfeasance or media malpractice is not to just pour through random emails with the word pizza in them and then like not learn anything about any of the underlying facts or details of the Jeffrey Epstein case. Cause like who would bother with that? That's so lame and boring. If it's not a short form video, then like it doesn't matter. And then like just blast out these decontextualized pieces of information across social media. Like, I prefer the mainstream media if that's the alternative.
Yeah, I think that seems to be something I'm noticing amongst, just anecdotally, amongst people, is that they're the people who are all in on this and love it and think it's fun and whatever. Then there are people who I legitimately worry about are losing their minds. And then a lot of people are going, all right, the podcast space was cool. It's good. It put a necessary check on a lot of the mainstream media, which has has done an incredible amount of institutional damage to its own, to itself, but they're just reverting back to mainstream media because the conspiracy stuff is no reasonable human has any amount of time to refute every single TikTok video that they see about how the pilot may have changed his name and his daughter disappeared and maybe she was sacrificed in the temple at Epstein Island.
Yeah, I mean, it's just no longer a favorable contrast anymore between this alternative media or like the non-traditional media and the traditional or mainstream media. I mean, I've been of that view definitely in a confident way since 2024 at minimum. But when Trump could like bypass any legitimate interview during the campaign, he's done a ton as president. But when he was a candidate, he very seldom did any legitimate like journalistic interview. He would just go to friendly podcasts because they were so dominant in the culture at that point. And that was sufficient for his like media schedule. And it was like just not a good replacement because like if you're just ass kissing a presidential nominee and then you're not performing like a journalistic service. And so, yeah, that to me was a turning point in terms of my critical focus, honing much more in on the influence or the influence of the so-called alt media that had gotten so ascendant by 2024. And look, now we see the results, I guess, in terms of how people have just zero standards whatsoever to interpret this stuff. With
but
the
even
Epstein
the New York
files.
Times was like, hey, there's a lot of you who are citizen journalists making a lot of connections and finding things, and you might see something that, the DOJ, I guess, like closed the case. Yeah. And so a lot of people feel like they covered it up. And so now they're asking for tips. And I don't know if that's just all of the mainstream or old media trying to get in on the sweet algorithm juice of the Epstein as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's not to say, nothing I say should be construed as me denigrating the idea that citizen journalists or just individual citizens who are, intelligent and adept researchers and so forth can produce good insights and obtain good information and sometimes even do a much better job covering certain stories than the quote mainstream media. So don't get me wrong as like unduly venerating the mainstream media at all or doubting the contributions that quote unquote citizen journalists can make. I mean, I have people who send me stuff all the time who do a bunch of research and then, I'll check it out. And like a lot of times it does check out and it's very useful. I'm just saying that like in terms of the main shows and podcasts and like the most influential sort of nodes in the media ecosystem, like if they're covering this stuff from the standpoint that Joe Rogan covers it or Tucker now covers it because he's like doing Pizzagate is real as well, or Candace Owens, if they're like the most popular offerings, then like that's not an ecosystem that I can say much good about.
Right. Yeah, I mean it's so interesting. We did a dumpster fire on this. Just I was joking about how he's freebasing it and the numbers did better than our average numbers. And I'm like, I can see how easy it would be to just go all in on this. And I couldn't do it because I would hate myself. And ultimately I think in order to maintain any semblance of sanity, the thing that I've had to do is just remain skeptical about everything. And like you said, ground myself in what do we know? What do we know? What can we know? What do we know? Does that mean that I'm wrong? Does that mean there's information out there that we don't have available to us? Does that mean that rich people don't try and cover shit up and get out of paying taxes? No. But what do we know in terms of this? And it does like when I start seeing people having mental breakdowns in airports and screaming they're eating babies, I start really worrying about our population and what this kind of panic does to people.
Or, people like the number one jeer that people will now jeer at Trump or, or to heckle him. It would be like pedo. I remember that happened like maybe a month ago. Or like randomly, like J.D. Vance got protested over the summer where people were just chanting pedo at him.
Yeah,
Ron DeSantis got protested. Like, what did he do? And where people were just like shouting pedo at him, like, I guess because he's a Republican and like he's
Who was that?
Ron DeSantis.
Oh yeah, that was recent, right?
That was over the summer. The J.D. Vance and Ron DeSantis ones that I'm thinking of were over the summer. There was a more recent one with Trump where he was at like the car factory or whatever in Michigan.
Yeah, and he flicked him off.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's crazy making, but in terms of skepticism, look, I mean, of course, I would advocate cultivating a rational skepticism. That's like core to being a journalist in a way, but there's a point at which people's conception of skepticism veers into like just nihilism or just like total idiocy, where, for example, like people were telling me yesterday, so there's like some of the new files, like they have show reports into Epstein's death, right? And there's a bunch of photos of his dead body. And, people will just see that and assume, okay, it must be a fake body. Okay, I guess it's theoretically possible that it's a fake body. And like, as Thomas Massey is now saying, because he's internet brained, and so are like a bunch of these politicians or people in Congress who are kind of like feeding into this.
Yeah, there's a lot of them.
Thomas Massey just has a theory that he just decided to explain to everybody on some dopey podcast this week. He's basically of the view that Epstein somehow escaped from prison in 2019 and he's alive. And this is supposed to be like the master or like the biggest expert in the government on the Epstein files. And like, does he know that there's a bunch of these files where like they have like death reports and records and photos and like, so like, if that's your view, can you explain like how you know this body to be fake? Because that's what would have to be the case, right? And so, like, if your skepticism leads you to just instinctively declare that the body must be fake, and you don't have to have any basis for saying that, like, it could be fake, but like, you got to tell me why. You got to use like your words to make an argument or produce some kind of evidence somewhere, rather than just like the immediate discounting of it as like necessarily fake because it just must be based on some like worldview you've developed around all this stuff. Like, that's not real skepticism. To me, that's really more just like this weird credulity that people try to justify by calling it skepticism.
That's interesting. One of the more frustrating aspects of observing this is people who are saying, I've seen the list, I've seen the names, and it's like, you're okay, so fucking give us stop saying you've seen it. Why don't you just name the names?
Well, they tried to do that earlier this week. Rokon and Thomas Massey were like, oh no, looky here. On some random document that we fished out, there are excessive redactions and they appear to have redacted some men's names. Look, I wish there were no redactions at all. I've been calling for that from the outset. But the victims, quote unquote, and their lawyers have been demanding the most expansive possible redactions because they don't want any, quote, identifying information at all that could even be remotely even just, possibly attached to anything that they've ever done. And so what we get is this broad for redaction criteria and like documents what might relate to some alleged victim where it's just block after block after block of solid black. But Rokon and Thomas Massey, did find a superfluous some superfluous redactions on a document that redacted references to certain men. And they're like, oh, these must be, and so what was the implication that they were trying to give? That these must be perpetrators of child sex trafficking. So they get the redactions removed. Rokon goes to the floor of the House and like announces the names. Like, there's no evidence ever anywhere that these guys are child sex trafficking perpetrators. So they pretty much defame them. So that's why you don't hear a lot of people naming the names that they could theoretically name, because, there's something called libel and defamation law in the United States. And if you're going to like falsely accuse somebody of being complicit in child sex trafficking criminality, then that could have repercussions, and rightly so if you're wrongly maligning them.
It's so crazy too how it's swallowed. Like, I don't know if you've seen any of this stuff, but now it's being connected to, remember the girl who disappeared in Portugal, Madeline?
Madeleine McCann.
and it's being
How's that connected? I haven't seen that.
Allegedly they took her as one of the parents sacrificed her to the like Eyes Wide Shut, and then John Benet Ramsey. That's apparently what happened to her allegedly. So now it's like this like mega conspiracy that's consuming all. Somehow 9/11 is in there too now. And it used to be just 9/11.
Let's go all the way back to the beginning. Like Jeffrey Epstein parted the oceans and like the continental tectonic plates, and the dinosaurs roamed the earth until Jeffrey Epstein did something. And
what do you think is the outcome of this stuff?
Maybe we're witnessing the origination of a new world religion. So Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, etc. Boring. We have a new one. I mean, this is a dogma. It is a mythology. It is something that clearly gives people a fair amount of meaning. It's sort of perverse meaning. For some bizarre reason, and as I've frequently observed, people really want there to be a lot more systemic, rampant, pervasive child rape than there appears to be. Like, why would you want there to be more child rape? Like, shouldn't you be relieved if it actually turns out that you were mistaken to think that so many children were being mass raped?
Like, why do people want to believe this?
Because they don't actually care about child rape. They don't actually care about the welfare of children. That's not why they're so invested in it. They're invested in it because it's become this bizarre dogma that somehow animates them and like gives them a prism through which to understand the world in this sicko way.
And it's sort of one of the Epstein industry, right? Like there's a whole
there's a whole Epstein industry racket. It's like probably around worth $1 billion, I would estimate. In terms of like the financial remunerations that have gone out from like different institutions, and like nobody talks about this financial incentive at all. Seems like human nature that like if millions of dollars are presented to you as something that you can get, like if you do X, Y, and Z, a lot of people are probably going to do X, Y, and Z to get like millions, as much as $5 million tax free from these settlement funds. And there's also like individualized settlements and lawsuits, and like if there's like a confluence of all these financial temptations that
this was something
apparently we're just not supposed to talk about. I don't get it.
Yeah, Ted Frank was talking about this when he was on the podcast, how he really just hates that JP Morgan paid people out. It now feels a lot more of the conspiracy theorists. What did they know and how are they connected? But the fact that they went after this bank for basically being associated with Epstein, correct?
Yeah, I mean, the claim was that, they were complicit in a child sex trafficking operation because Jeffrey Epstein was a client of JP Morgan. The most sort of extreme version of that argument was not the one that was ultimately accepted by the judge, but I think they basically, they settled and agreed it was like a negligent thing because he would use cash, or he would withdraw cash, right? And the idea was that there ought to have been more scrupulous monitoring of his cash withdrawals. It was a complicated case. So that's not the only factor, but they
really have gone down the rabbit hole on all of these actual cases.
But they conceded and settled, right? And then like the floodgates open, and anybody who can make any claim and get a bunch of money is now therefore a quote victim.
Yeah, even
if their claims aren't tested in any meaningful way. And then the number gets wildly inflated. Then a misconception among many is that in terms of these settlement funds, people who were adults at their time of their claimed victimization were eligible for settlement payouts, as well as people who were not adults or people who are under 18. So like adults have always been eligible to get millions of dollars by basically reframing what happened to them 10, 15, 20 years ago, now calling it trafficking. So like, even if they contemporaneously would have perceived whatever they were doing as consensual, if they engaged in any kind of sexual activity at all, can now be recast with many, many years of hindsight, and with the idea that now they have learned that Jeffrey Epstein was a notorious pedophile, so therefore anything that could have possibly ever been done in relation to him must have been sexually predatory, right?
Yeah.
So it's like a hindsight bias, and also with the financial incentive, it's just like you're brewing up this like stew for the radical inflation of claims of victimization that then get like validated by external authorities, and then foment this moral panic, mass hysteria.
It's weird being
is this a pedophile scandal or not? Because like when Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, was testifying before the House Judiciary Committee this week in that like shit show of a hearing, which I actually still haven't gotten a chance to watch in full yet because I've been swamped with other stuff. But like, so I look at it. I know people are like going wild about it. I look at it. I look at these women standing up behind her and like doing a protest. And because I'm, like I said, a total maniac, I recognize all of them, and I happen to know that they're all people who claim that they were adults at the time of their claimed victimization.
Right.
And yet the average member of the public sees that, or the media presents that as though these victims of child sex crimes are denouncing Pam Bondi for not holding their perpetrators accountable or something. That's just like not the case. And I don't know, and there's still like a chronic refusal to provide even the slightest context to that effect.
It's weird viewing this as I mean, the reason I've always been fascinated with the Epstein, I guess the first time I became fascinated with it around 2015, 2016. And then again, when the 2018 thing came out, is because I was a young girl, and I was a little bit of a, wild, I easily could have been an Epstein girl. If I was in Florida at the right time, I didn't have very much supervision. And I lied to guys all the time about my age so that I could hang out with older men. And
really fascinating.
This was something that I really was.
I lied to older women all the time about my age. Believe me, none were interested in.
Yeah, and I also am sensitive to this kind of idea of being groomed when you're young by older men for other reasons.
I know, but the concept of grooming has grown so expansive that it can mean virtually anything now. Like, grooming, I'm sorry. If you look at like the coinage of that terminology, it referred to adults habituating actual children for eventual sexual activity.
Right.
But now we're told like adults can be groomed. Anybody can be groomed, I guess.
Yeah.
So it's beyond like something that would be predatorily happening to children to condition them to become receptive to like adult sexual advances.
I still think it can happen even to like teenage girls. I still think a teenage girl could be groomed by a man who was a predator. Like,
what's the cutoff? Like, at what age can somebody no longer be groomed? Because like one of the women who was standing up yesterday claims that she was, I guess, quote unquote, groomed by Epstein at age 21. And we're told like, if we don't understand how that can be the case, or how that's like a correct depiction of what grooming can entail, then we're sort of ignorant as to like what the current ideology around, sexual misconduct is or something. And then like,
I guess it would be just like, anytime I hear teen, I still am sensitive to the idea that even if they're legal, whatever, they're still in the teen years. And that seems young to me.
Okay, fine. Like, I mean, I have no problem with saying if somebody who's 18 and maybe they're a bit immature, or they're not ready to like have older guys swarming them to try to entice them into some kind of sexual scenario, that's fine. But like, that doesn't necessarily have to be a criminal offense.
No.
Like sometimes bad things happen that the law doesn't have to come in with an iron fist on. And then everything becomes trafficking or grooming, and like in the context of criminal law. So there should be like, there's distinctions of like, what are some like maybe less than desirable things that can happen that on an ethical level or just like from a prudential level or just in terms of like what's some or an emotional level to that we like would advise against, like if you were a friend of that girl, like a confidant or like a parent or a teacher, whatever, somebody who was advising the girl, you would say, look, don't get involved with this guy, or this is like what his real intent is. That's fine. That's like normal. That's how people interact all the time. But like when that gets roped into like the criminal with like the federal law enforcement apparatus or something, that's when things go haywire.
Right. Yeah, like because like you said, it's like the encounters would kind of escalate. That is in some sense the process of grooming and how this plays out. And if these girls were not 18 and were lying and were young, then they would be more susceptible to that kind of slow process, which I do think is grooming. And if you're under 18,
I just don't understand. Like, can you be a grooming victim at age 21 to the degree that
I don't think
to the degree that you should be entitled to millions of dollars from a settlement program 20 years after the fact?
For me, it's always been teen. Like for me, it's always been if I hear teen after, I still have a lot of sensitivity.
So a 19-year-old should be eligible 20 years after the fact if they claim that they were groomed by, let's say, an older man whose invitation they accepted to, I don't know, go to an island getaway with a bunch of their friends, and like something happened one night. I don't know. I mean,
yeah,
I think we need some. I think we need some better. Like maybe she regrets the experience. Maybe she even enjoyed the experience at the moment. It's hard to say, but like obviously, if like the money is dangled over you many years later, then like what's stopping you from recasting things? And now you're a victim, and now like you're fomenting a moral panic that we see the pretty destructive consequences of at the moment. So I think we need a little bit more rigor in how we understand this stuff, and like make sure to separate what the criminal law can rectify, and use some empirical standards to evaluate this stuff, so that we don't just like lapse into this mindless mania.
What's funny is that so many of in particular, like the libertarians who have latched onto this, I'm like, you guys are always arguing to lower the age of consent laws.
Yeah, I never had a pre-existing interest, I promise, in like examining the intricacies of each state's age of consent. Well, I mean, I have to say it is kind of interesting in a way, not for my own personal purposes, which people always want to accuse, but I don't know. It's just sort of interesting that there's this patchwork of laws that are, pretty consequential in terms of if you get tied up with them.
Yes.
But I don't know. It's just sort of strange. Like, okay, if something happens to a 17-year-old, if something that is allegedly sexually illicit happens between a 17-year-old and like an older man, that's not presumptively pedophilia, but people don't seem to recognize that like in the majority of the US states, it's legal.
Right.
Or like a consensual sexual encounter. And again, it could be inadvisable. It could be something that I'm sure lots of fathers would tell their 17-year-old daughter that they would be well served not to get involved with. But like, again, that's different than what the law is. And
isn't it true, like in some places, it's not even age, it's like age range?
So like in states where it is, say, 18, so like Florida is an example of a state where it's 18, which is central to the whole legal trajectory of the Epstein story. There are more. California, others. Sometimes they'll have like a Romeo and Juliet, they call it, exception. So if, I think it's going to be up 2 to 5 years, the male, if the partner is older, then they're not violating a law. But in the states where it's, just 16, states where it's 16, they'll also have a Romeo and Juliet law if like it's a 15-year-old and a 17-year-old or 18-year-old, something like that. It depends by state.
Right.
But in state where it's like, if the legal age of consent is 16, then, people I think are sometimes shocked to learn this, but like it's technically legal.
Yeah.
For a 16-year-old and a 40-year-old to have a consensual sexual encounter. Again, it's very possible that it might not be advisable.
Yeah.
But that's what the law is.
Yeah.
So is that pedophilia if, again, it's legal in the majority of U.S. states? If so, then the definition of pedophilia has been broadened to the point where it no longer makes any coherent sense, and its principal use, it would seem, to peddle hysteria. Like I know people. People think it's like real suspicious to say this, and like it must mean I'm covering up my own sexual depravities. Like I happen not to be, but if people want to think that, okay, fine. There's nothing really I can do about it. But like I don't see why it would be such a problem to confine pedophilia to like what the clinical definition is in the medical literature. Like it's sexual attraction to prepubescent children.
Right.
It doesn't mean that sexual activities with post-pubescent children are like good, or we want to condone them or endorse them or like whatever, or that it's like something that should just be accepted under every circumstance. It's like it can still be a bad idea, obviously, for a 15-year-old and some older person to have a sexual liaison. But like, why does it have to? Why is everything pedophilia now?
Yeah. This
Like
is
when did that
interesting.
happen? Because that term is unique in causing the immediate deactivation of people's critical faculties and just launching into a blithering frenzy.
So during Me Too, Chris D'Elia got canceled. I don't know if you remember. He's a comedian, and it was everyone said he was a pedophile, and a lot of the people who have
I don't remember that.
What?
I remember there being some controversy around him. I don't remember it being pedophilia,
But it was the same
sure you're right.
ages as these Epstein girls.
Okay.
Or maybe even older. I mean, they lied. His defense was that they lied. A lot of the people who were defending Chris D'Elia are kind of all in on this. You know, Epstein was eating. I mean, it is at the point now where they were literally eating children and sacrificing children. That's where it's gone. It isn't.
That's just deranged fantasy. I mean, there are some interpretations of the Epstein story that I think are basically groundless or misguided, or they are a misunderstanding of some of the facts, etc. But at least they're like tied to some kernel of truth somewhere. This whole cannibalism and like child ritual sacrifice and eating baby stuff, this is just so off the reservation that it's in a different category. It's just like total delusion. It's not even something that you can claim to connect to anything that's legitimate. It's like a different layer of mythology.
What is your biggest defect of character?
My personal biggest defect?
Like why are you like this, Michael?
I'm a walking, breathing defect. So I'm just one giant defect. What is the biggest defect in my character? Good question. I mean, I don't know. What do you think it is based on our conversation today? Maybe I should ask somebody else who has a more objective view on me. I'm not probably the best source because like I'm me and you're observing me. So what do you observe my biggest defect to be?
That's like such a perfect answer for my experience of you being just so. It's funny because my husband, I feel like you and my husband
need a haircut. I'll admit that. That's a defect.
Would get along because he's very much just like, what can we know? That is always where he comes back to. What can we know? And you obviously had good training as a journalist, and I don't know. I don't know. I wonder what your first gut instinct to that question was.
Like I said, I definitely need a haircut, so I'll admit that's a defect.
Of character?
Of character. I don't know. I guess it might be an extension of my character, arguably in some way.
Yeah.
Do I owe you for this therapy session at this point? Since this seems like something you would talk about on the couch.
I'm always just curious.
See, if you asked me an Epstein question, I would like have an answer ready to go. But now I have to.
These are the same two questions I ask everyone.
Oh, is it? Okay, I didn't realize that. I think there are people who would like me to try to initiate social encounters or social gatherings more often than I tend to.
Uh-huh.
So I can be oblivious to people wanting me to do that sometimes. So I think that's probably a defect.
That is. What's your biggest asset?
My biggest asset? I mean, my gorgeous looks, for sure.
Aside
Don't you
from
agree?
your haircut.
My unwieldy beard that is also out of control due to my Epstein mania.
Other than your dogged pursuit of the truth.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like my intuitions are pretty good in terms of like what journalistic avenues to follow much of the time. And so I'm sort of happy with how my intuitions hold up. If you go,
I would love to talk to you more too someday about just how you got into journalism and what that path was.
I just fell from the sky. One day I woke up and it's like, whoa, here I am, journalism world.
Where can we find you?
M Tracey everywhere. MTRACEY. Make sure it's Tracey with an E. Very important.
Do you have support? Like, are people going,
no,
thank you?
Absolutely not.
No one?
No, I have people. Yeah. There are people who are saying nice things. So I'm inundated with like the most vicious possible negativity. But yeah, there are some people who are offering words of support, let's say. So it's fine. And like, again, I'm wired in a weird way where like it wouldn't bother me even if I did not have the support.
Yeah, that's why I was like, what made you this way, that you're just wired in that way? But that can be another podcast.
I got wacky genetics, I guess.
Well, I appreciate
Something was in the water in Ireland and Italy.
I want you to go on Rogan. Like, I would love to see that conversation.
I don't lobby really to go on shows, so I'm good with what I'm doing. I mean, sure, I would do it. I'd be happy to do it, but hey.
Has anyone considered your debate requests? Like, are you going to debate
Not really.
Dave
They
Smith
all run and hide. Dave Smith has been ignoring it for months, and like
He
intermediaries
debates
have
everybody.
independent. So we heard, but apparently not. And it's not just me. Like I did proactively offer at one point because he made this ridiculous statement at the Turning Point USA conference in July saying Donald Trump covered up a giant child rapist ring, which is just like a total idiocy. So I did publicly offer, and then like intermediaries who independently wanted to set up the debate tried to set it up, and like nothing happened. And like none of these people who are like these esteemed Epstein researchers or in the Epstein quote space, as Daryl Cooper describes it. I don't know what the Epstein space really is. It sounds like a weird space to be in. But none of them will do it. So like I've been very proactive in trying to offer people who have a counter view to
Epstein
mine.
maximalists.
Yeah, to hash it out, but I don't know. It hasn't been forthcoming. So strange because like I know I'm very willing to talk or debate with virtually anybody, and it seems like they're kind of like suspiciously resistant.
Well, I appreciate your time and your voice in this, and it is much harder to find people who are countering all of this in this space. You know, it's easy for me to find all of the conspiracies. It's much harder to find the kind of needle in the haystack person that is saying, you know, maybe wait a minute. So
That's
appreciate
me,
that.
needle in a haystack, diamond in a rough.
Thank you, Michael.
All right, take care.
This has been Walk-Ins Welcome with Bridget Phetasy. I'm Bridget Phetasy, and you're welcome. It's the dumbest line.